All right. Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. As you may have noticed on the graphic on the intro to the show, I want to acknowledge a member and friend to many, John Fred Kilpatrick, passed away at 81 this last month, and we wanted to acknowledge his passing. And he will definitely be missed. I was fortunate enough, I got to meet him once and talk to him a little bit. And this wasn't too long ago. And well into his late 70s, he was formidable at the throwing axes we had at the event. He was making them all stick and putting everybody else to shame. So there you go. Hail to you, Fred. That said, welcome everybody. We had a fantastic midsummer celebration at Odenshof this last weekend. Thank you to everybody who came out. We had folks there from New Hampshire, Delaware, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Where else far afield? We had a couple more. We had some folks from Minnesota. We had people from far and wide come and join us. It was a fantastic event. So yeah, if you made it, awesome. Congratulations. If you did not make it, you should definitely make sure you do next year. But you also have a chance to do some other pretty cool things. Coming up in just about a month, we have Sigurd at Sigurheim. That's in Jackson County, Tennessee. It's going to be awesome. We're looking forward to seeing you there. Svan will be there. I will be there. Producer Nick will be there, as long as many other AFA luminaries. I would, look forward to seeing you. If I haven't seen you in a while, look forward to meeting you if I haven't gotten to meet you yet. So come on out and share that with us. And that's going to be followed the next month by Freyfaxi at Baldershof. I will also be at that. Love to meet everybody there. That's at Baldershof in Murdoch, Minnesota. So if you can make either of those, you should. And we're excited to see if you can make it out for these spectacular events. Also, starting off program, Austin in Wisconsin donated $10 each to our Freyshof Fund, our prison ministry, and the Baldershof Steeple, as well as to Victory Never Sleeps. So thank you for that. Much appreciated, Austin. And GW Farnsworth donated $30 to VNS and $20 to Folk Services. Thank you both. We appreciate you guys. So I guess that brings to the next kind of order of business. So it's always been the plan that as soon as we get Njordhof paid off, we immediately are going to hit the ground running and start trying to get Freyshof. And we're absolutely living up to that. We have looked at a number of properties so far. By we, I mean Witan Clifford Erickson and his lovely wife, Githya Katie Erickson. They've scouted places for us. We've got some plans and some things in the works. A big part of that is kind of next step. We are figuring out some lending, and we are trying to raise money for a down payment. So we've started raising money in the war chest for that. It's currently at $2,650. That's the extra 10 not on the graphic is the 10 that Austin just put towards it. So we appreciate you guys. We appreciate everyone's generosity. If you would like to donate, the link is on the screen, or you can go to runestone.org/donate. But thank you. We have some amazingly generous folks, and we have been really seeing an upswing in people sharing that generosity with us. So thank you guys. So we took a little bit of a break last time Svan was on. And the reason that we spent, 7 episodes on the Volsunga saga was so that we are better prepared for the closing series of poems in the Edda. And these are poems that are very seldom talked about, but are a part of our lore, a part of the Edda, and something that we should all know and be familiar with. And we're dealing with one such poem today, the Grípisspá, or the prophecy of Gripir. And so, Svan, what, if anything, do folks need to know before we get into the subject? You are muted, Svan.
Terribly sorry. The best way to look at this poem is that it's kind of the way that a director might do a prequel after the movie, if you will. We know that all the main corpus of the Volsunga saga is very old and has been gathering and kind of slowly building as it goes through our culture. And there's new things added on and so on and so forth. This is, again, a poet, or the attempt of the poet to kind of bring in characters from the main poem and go in front of that and have a time that was not spoken about in the poem. So this is a younger poem based on how structured it is. So its structure lends to the fact that a young skald was looking at the story and said, these two characters, we're going to pull that and kind of just focus on his uncle prophesizing his life, Sigurd's life. And that way I can flex my poetic knowledge. I can also insert a lot of our culture and our ideals into it. So one of the things that I wanted to really point out to people is that this style is called, the style of meter is called forniðislaug, which means like the old way of telling poetry. It's the old meter. And it's marked by some interesting things, but it's very, very easy for people to replicate. So if you're trying to write prayers, or you are speaking prayers, but you have them kind of memorized, you can duplicate this very, very well. And another cool part of it is very close to the same structure that was done in Beowulf. So now we have this crossing over, where it becomes more pan-European, pan-Germanic European. And I find that very, again, just it's re-emphasizing a lot of what we do. It's alliterative, so that means that the first letters they need to rhyme together, and sounds rhyme together. So the TH sound needs to rhyme with other TH sounds. It can't be simply the T and then a TH. And it's really easy for folks to replicate. You can, and it's more complicated than what I'm giving, but on the basic level, if you had two sentences, the first sentence is going to be divided by a comma. And the heavy pronounced letter in the first sentence has to be done twice, one before the comma and one after the comma. And the funny part about it is a lot of times you don't know what that sound is till you get to the second sentence, which has to start with that. So if there was a point to say, the great god Tyr judges the tides of war till the end of man's time comes. So the letter T becomes the alliterative anchor point. And it doesn't sound as clear in modern English, but it is pretty close. So I would definitely look, if you are interested in poetics or in changing your prayer forms to add some of that, perhaps for larger ceremonies or what have you, you could absolutely look up Old Norse poetry, and you could look up Fornithis style. I don't know if you could pop that up there on the screen, but Old Norse poetry is where you will find it if you're looking up on like Wikipedia. But yeah, so that's one of the interesting things about this. It's so structured, it's so well put together that it's believed that it is a younger poem. And it is brief. It's not as long as the ones we've been covering, but it does give a lot of historical referencing, which lends to perhaps more an understanding of the past, especially with Attila, and that even though this was perhaps written in the 11th or 12th century, this is still speaking about events that happened, and it brings in the Burgundians with King Gundicaris, or I think is how he's written in Latin, and how they were almost completely annihilated by the Huns. And there's a lot of interesting stuff historically and also spiritually. We every single one of these poems, we always get a glimpse into the theological of our ancestors, which is why it's so important to read them. So.
All right. Over in the chat, just watching a couple of things. Our folk builder in New Hampshire, Ron Boardman, was wondering or suggesting that now we need to do the Nibelungenlied. I would really like to. I like it a lot. It's very long, and I think that we extended people's tolerance for this particular story quite a bit, and we'll need to shake it up a little bit when we're done with this. But I would like for us to cover that at some point. It's a fun read, and it's done very epically. It's my favorite version of the story, but it's been a lot of years since I read it. It's been 15 years since I read it last. That said, other thing going into it, and I think we answered in the chat, but it's in there for a question, so we'll ask it. Brandy wants to know what her friend Svan is drinking.
I wrote in there on the chat. I'm iced coffee.
Looks like a mudslide.
Yeah, it's looking a little muddy, but it's still hot here.
I wish I had a mudslide. Mudslides are delicious.
Yeah, Suna just set, so it's still warm here. It's been terribly hot, and then Thor came through and gave us just a little bit of reprieve of rain, but
we had a pretty big fire in the area yesterday, and then we got hit by a very fortuitous rainstorm out of nowhere, which doesn't happen that often in the high desert where we're at. So that was nice. It set things right and fixed that particular problem. I should say my friend Roy gifted me this. It is a orange Moscato, and as one might imagine, it's delicious.
Yeah, Moscatos are sweet.
They are. I like me a sweet drink. I splurge on them. I started drinking a lot of red wine on the program because dry red wine is very carbohydrate friendly. and I enjoy it. But I like the sweet drinks, and this definitely qualifies. That said, Svan, would you like? Oh, well, I'll acknowledge this because it's going on in the meantime. Uh, Gabriel in PA donated $30 to Phrasehoff. Says couple episodes behind, but hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and hail to you, Gabriel. Thank you very much for your donation. We appreciate it. All right, Svan, take us into the poem, if you will.
Oh, I did want to say too, there's characters and points that we've already covered with Sigurd and Helgi and Sinfjotli and Brynhild, but there are also differences. And one of the big ones that I wanted to bring up is the divine connection to Lord Odin as a being descendants of Lord Odin. And so royalty and kingship evolved over time. The connectivity to the divine has always been a considering point. I think it was originally that we are descended as a people, and then there became specific royal houses that were descended from Lord Odin or from Lord Freyr, or I don't know actually if there's any that have said that they were descended from Lord Thor, but that would also kind of lend to the overarching sense of his troth and loyalty to Sif, and again in stories that's continually emphasized. But I think it's really interesting, and it would also explain in the older poem why Lord Odin shows up to the banquet, to the wedding in the first place, because that's not really emphasized, other than you're left to the imagination. Maybe he's inserting sword into fate in order to create all of these moments in which he can analyze the souls of warriors and men so that he can choose them. But in this case, there's a direct link made that wasn't really made before. So yeah, that's a lot of people might not know this. There's many different stories of Hercules, and there are many endings to the story of Hercules, and this was common for there to be kind of more of a network of stories, not just one singular one. And it's very much the same amongst the Germanic folk. So you will see these common names spoken of, but there will be variations and little things. And I would even argue that there was probably more of them before they were written down. They just didn't make it to Iceland.
So absolutely, it's important to different people want to realize this for different reasons. But I think it is worth keeping in mind that there's no reason to believe, there's no assumption. In fact, there's reason to believe to the contrary, that this is all the lore there was, is the stuff that's made it down to us. I think one of the tragedies with history that we need to be aware of and not repeat is so much gets lost if it's not recorded, if it's not copied, if it's not distributed, and if it's not safeguarded. But reading a wide swath of our lore, even when it's not about the gods in the most, essential sense, teaches us a lot about how Asatru was practiced in our ancestors' day. And it's very informative to read all the rest of our lore. Our lore synergizes in a really cool way. When I first started reading the lore, sometimes it was overwhelming different pieces because I didn't have the context, or I wasn't familiar with the same things that, they'd constantly be referencing and whatever. So if that's you, don't be dismayed. The more pieces of lore you read, the more stuff begins to make much more sense and build upon itself. The more you'll see, different things, reference things you're already familiar with through your other reading. So wherever you start in it, the more that you read, the richer and deeper your understanding of the lore gets. Just like doing this, the Volsunga saga is not the entirety of the information possibly available throughout all of Western Europe of this really seminal story. It's the stuff that the chronicler in in Iceland at the time was able to gather and be familiar with. But getting all these other pieces and indications of other pieces really flesh it out and give it dimension. So it's really valuable that way. And so anybody who wants to follow along tonight, you can find this wherever you might have, your copy of the Eddas or whatever you'd like to do. But we will specifically, I question that link. I don't know if that link's right. I think it's missing an I. Anyways.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the ass.
All right. So Voluspow.org. That's where Svan and I have been getting all but, because we're silly and didn't look carefully, all but Egil Saga from. But even that was on there. Now, when we get done with both of the Eddas, I think we may run out of material on there and we'll have to go to a different source. But Voluspow.org is an awesome source. It's got the side-by-side with the Old Norse, which is really helpful and really cool. And that's where we're reading from directly. But as always, use whatever translation you have. There might be interesting variances that lead to some discussion. But that's where we're at this evening.
Of note, I just checked. I'm actually correct. They spelt it without that I.
All right. So the good folks at Voluspow.org misspelled their link. That's on them, not on producer Nick. But there you go. With that, Svan, will you take us into the text?
Absolutely. Okay, so we start first with Sigurd's father. Sigmundur, son of Volsung, was king in Frankland. Sinfjotli was his eldest son, the second Helgi, and the third Halmundur. Borghildur, Sigmund's queen, had a brother who was called, and see, okay, this is the part where there is a break in the poem because of most likely damage. So it doesn't state, and there is, let me see, there's extensive stuff here at the bottom. I wonder if there's any mention of it. No. Well, okay, so there is a break there, and then it shifts to the next sentence. But Sinfjotli, her stepson, and more damage, both sought the hand of the same woman, and therefore he sought the death of Sinfjotli. So it's worth remembering from the old story that Sinfjotli fell in love with a woman who was had a rival suitor. And in doing so, in that story, he was not chosen. He was not He did not win out in that. And then he went and fought wars in the East, in Finnmark and Lithuania and so on and so forth. Again, because he was built for war. But the other part of that is, in that story, that's Sigurd's sister's son. So here we have him jumping up a generation. So we're going to be working through a lot of familial jumping or just historical jumping, and you got to bear with it. So, so here we see, but when he came home, Borghildur, who is the queen of Sigmund, told him to go away, but Sigmundur offered him weregild, and she was going to receive it. But at the funeral feast, Borghildur bore the ale. She took a great deal of poison, a hornful, and presented it to Sinfjotli. So here we have Sinfjotli is vying for a woman, and so is Borghildur's, I believe it's brother, is also going for the same woman. And in this case here, she ends up attempting to poison Sinfjotli, her stepson, in order to kind of remove him. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this could be done. It could be looked at as starting out the story with intrigue and plot. The other is that it could also kind of reflect a certain sense that marriage and children from previous marriages may not have been viewed at the time as so deeply kin that slaying them or being involved in that would be a kinslayer, or she's just that nefarious that doesn't even matter. But it's worth noting at the time, especially with sea travel, that our ancestors, when they went abroad, went overseas, a lot of them did not come back. And that doesn't mean that everything stops at home. Things change. And a great amount of the reason why the Nordic ancestors enacted it so much in raiding was because a lot of that went to the first son of the house, or the first daughter. If she got married, then that was brought into the marriage. So this kind of follows along with just how things were at that time. But it is, again, very, very interesting. And she presents him with a horn full of poison. But when he looked into the horn, he discerned that it was poisoned and said to Sigmundur, "Ouch, the drink is poisoned." Sigmundur took the horn and drained it. They say that Sigmund was he drained it by drinking it. They say that Sigmund was so tough that no poison could harm him inside or outside, and all his sons could withstand poison outside on their flesh. So another good point about this is a common trope in the warrior culture, is this: someone is poisoning your horn. I don't think that the case of that happening is actually really high. A lot of the poisonous plants in the northern regions are not as terrible as, say, hemlock of the Mediterranean. But it was absolutely to set a mood about this. And it's, again, referencing to poison outside the body. So poisoned blades. Our knowledge on this is really, really limited. but looking at horticulture and looking at plant life in the Nordic regions, I don't know if this is, again, just more of a story point, less of a true reflection of reality.
So something to consider is this doesn't take place far to the north in Scandinavia. Part of it takes place in
Frontland, yeah.
But a great deal of it takes place in continental Europe, in Eastern Europe. And another thing is it emphasizes the treachery of women. And that's one of the things is this, this woman wants to do so you see in the Volsunga saga and throughout this, if you're familiar, there's an intense loyalty to like your house, your ancestors, and your offspring. Even if you find yourself in a blended family or you find yourself married to a particular king, you're still vying for the prominence of your family in that kingdom. So you're wanting to make sure that your offspring or your kin get the good stuff and not, your husband, the king's kin, or children that he's had by another woman, or, other family that is family, but not as close of family. And there's all these palace intrigues, and you see women often through greed or jealousy or other conniving to go about these things with treacherous things. And there's, a few things more treacherous than offering someone a horn and having filled that horn with poison. But it's strange here because that would probably, the upside of that is outside of the epic poetry thing, it's not like they get a forensic team in there. Oftentimes one may not know what happened. Poisons sometimes are slow acting. I didn't do nothing. And it's one of the things to where you could potentially pull that off without it being directly linked to you. But we live in the times of, the heroic age where these people have a degree of supernatural insight. They have that higher level of knowledge. We talked about that a little bit on the self-actualization described in the Rigsthula. When you're fully actualized, the art of nobility, the art of kings is this heightened awareness of these things. You start learning the runes, you start learning the speech of birds, you start learning how to look into the horn and discern that there's poison in it, whereas a normal person that wasn't, a heroic saga character would likely not be able to tell there was poison in it until it was very much too late. Or then you have folks like Sigmund, who's, just so awesome that he's immune to these things because he's of such a stout countenance, and also in the poem because he's the descendant of Odin. So he gets a certain magical aura when it comes to his predisposition, his toughness. It's also an interesting thing to note. Medieval kings were sometimes in the habit, if they lived in a court environment where poison was a thing, to microdose over the span of a long time to where they developed an immunity to certain poisons. It's not necessarily alluded to here. It's just interesting historical point that I'm aware of when I'm thinking about it. That's kind of, something interesting. And before I get off my soapbox, Ron Boardman, again, our folk builder in New Hampshire, bought us 5 coffees. It's a $25 donation. Thank you, Ron. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Well, so there's some little interesting things too that we're going to see here in in the translations and so on. For instance, like when he says, ouch, the drink is poisoned. The word ouch is not what instead it's almost like utilizing the English word, or like, and I mean from the UK, like oi, or for us, hey, but the word is I, like this is poisoned. So you're gonna see a little bit of that too, and we're gonna discuss another thing up here soon. That's kind of the translation is it's more literal than, or kind of slightly off the mark. So we have to be careful about those as well. And that happens with almost every translation. Any person who translates our poems might bridge gaps for poetics and leave linguistics behind, or do the other way, where linguistic is more important, but the overarching spiritual nature of the poem is kind of left to the wayside. So it's mentioned that Sigmundur can resist poison from internal and external on blades and such. So Borghildur brings a second horn to Sinfjotli and told him to drink, and everything happened as before. So this is poisoned. She brought it to me. Second, horn, and because my dad is like, drink it. So this is pretty hardcore. And then the third time she brought him the horn, plus scolding words, if he did not drink it up, but he spoke to Sigmund as before. And Sigmund said, "Let your beard sift it, son." Well, one of the things that's worth noting here is in the Old Norse, it says Han sadi lauto gron. Gron is your mustache, is your upper lip. So he's not saying like you fold up your beard or put it in front of the horn. He's saying
that would be absurd.
Right. And I mean, that might throw things off, but yeah, no, it's if people are reading this, they're like, wait a minute, what? Well, he's saying, let your mustache sift it. And most likely this is spoken in a jesting sense. And I could kind of see it that they're also probably thinking that Sinfjotli's being paranoid, and there's kind of this jesting of the festivities where it's like, no, you just got to let your mustache sift it out, boy, you'll be fine.
It's something to keep in mind too. When we get points of fact in the story, it doesn't mean those points of fact were known by the people in the room. It's also quite possible to conceive that Sigmund just can't taste the poison because he's immune. So he's like, okay, I'm gonna have to drink all three of your horns because you're so scared of this. Really? How about you sack up and be a man and let your mustache sift it and call it good.
Well, and on top of this is one of the most distinct differences between. So another thing is that people hearing this, unless they had heard a skald recite the full poem of the Volsunga saga, which is very rare, a lot of this is probably new or in bits and pieces. And the skald would know that sometimes. So the idea was, okay, I'm going to remove this character and continue on with the story because I want to focus on this
we're belaboring this a lot, and we will
Yeah.
get back. We'll make progress to this tonight. But something important to remember that is sad about us today is we don't have a robust culture that's unified like our ancestors did. And when I say our ancestors, I don't mean the Viking Age ancestors of this story or previous. I mean like our grandparents and beyond. You had cultural things that you knew these characters from your history or your nation or culture's high mythology. And up till a couple of generations ago, you had that, albeit a biblical reference. You didn't have to recount the entire story of Jesus's life or the entire story of Moses. You could, at a whim, when Moses was with Pharaoh, this thing happened, and you would know exactly what they were talking about, exactly what point in his story arc this took place in, and you could do these little asides and these little pieces without the full background story because everybody knew. You know, in a country, you could talk about, you know, when George Washington was, you know, when his men were camped at Valley Forge, this thing happened. Everyone wouldn't need to know, well, who's George Washington? Well, what was the nature? You don't need to know that because it's ingrained culturally. At this time, this story is so seminal to the understanding of certainly the nobility and the royal courts in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, that you just kind of, oh, okay, I remember this, and you didn't have to get necessarily all the background pieces.
Yeah, and like the subtle difference between they go to Frankeland and they're proclaimed kings in Frankeland, and then in the previous they were proclaimed kings in Hunnaland, or land of the Huns, which would be Eastern Europe, Poland, Ukraine area. And it really too was about their prowess. The Franks were very much a powerful tribe, had a lot of renowned built around them, same as the Huns. So again, having the heroes become kings in those lands is huge. But you know, there's slight differences there. And in this case, part of it is speculated that the first horn that is given doesn't actually have poison in it, and that Sinfjotli is just being paranoid because, and they don't state it in the poem, but Sinfjotli slays Borghild's brother in the courtship. Whereas,
and that's why they talk about the Weregild and her
yeah, okay, Weregild.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's in the missing piece.
Right. And so the wondering is he suspecting that it's poisoned? And then his father says, no, it's, you know, let me see this. It's fine. You know, you should drink it. Let your mustache sift it. And it's the third one that actually contains poison. And that's where Sinfjotli drinks and dies from it. Sigmundur carries him in his arms a long way and came to a long, narrow fjord. There was a small ship with a man in it. The man tells Sigmundur to cross the fjord. But when Sigmundur carried the body out onto the ship, then the vessel was full. The fellow said that Sigmund should go inside the fjord or go deeper and back to the land. And the fellow quickly took the ship out and away. So he lays the body of his son on the boat, and there's no more room for him. And they don't state why he's doing this or where they're going, but that's actually not important because of what it really is. And this is where we're getting into the theology of it. This man, the ferryman who takes the soul, is not just a ferryman. He is clearly a reference to Lord Odin, the one who carries souls. For some people, and I know a lot of people might have actually heard of this term, but the psychopomp, the transfer of the souls. And a lot of people utilize that with that connection to Mercury or Hermes. When Tacitus was living or writing about the Germanics, and he said that the Germanic people worship Tacitus. So we see this difference between, there is gods of war, gods of victory. There are gods that give victory and power to the nation, but more significantly, the warrior is concerned with the one who has the ability to transfer and elevate his soul. And so high focus is given to Lord Odin, the one who is building the army in heaven of powerful souls. And it's just interesting because this is outside of, say, Haurbard, where he is a ferryman and he is talking to Lord Thor, but the imagery is still there and it doesn't leave and it crosses over. We see this, of course, with the Stygian ferryman. His name is eluding me right now. In the Greco-Roman or Hellenic stories, the idea of the ferryman carrying over the soul through a threshold and water being a symbolic threshold between worlds. He takes and says, you should go back onto land. And then he quickly goes across and in essence disappears. And I find that very interesting because a lot of folks generally look at Lord Odin as strictly in a point of stasis, and he has the Valkyrie as his dynamic and willful and acting like tendrils into fate. But in this case, and in quite a few, there's the mentioning of him being over the water. And I think that this symbology was probably not understood by everyone in the audience, but was perhaps deliberately placed with intent to overarch that symbolism. So after he leaves with Sinfjotli, King Sigmundur stayed for a long time in Denmark. In Borghild's kingdom, after he married her, then Sigmundur traveled south into Frankland to the kingdom he had there. Then he married Hjordis, daughter of King Eilimi. Their son was Sigurd or Sigurd. And I don't know if they state why. I mean, obviously the presumption is that he leaves her because she killed his son, but it's not stated as that. He leaves sometime later. But I really feel
at this time, and I think there's a little bit of confusion when people read some of the sagas, it wasn't in the Viking Age, taking multiple wives wasn't really a thing of kings, but in the Volkwanderung of the migration era, that was very much something that kings did from time to time to cement alliances and to propagate the breeding of royal houses. So, like, for example, Attila notoriously had lots of wives from different nations that he had subjugated or needed to have a political alliance with. So it wasn't the common practice of our ancestors, but it was something from time to time that a king of like a nation would do to cement alliance.
Yeah, and I'm re-emphasizing again from our old show. I think a lot of folks, is Attila Asiatic? And we were talking about how Attila is not Genghis Khan. That Attila was most likely of a Western Asiatic / what would eventually be, Russia, and that of the Scythian, Persian.
It's real hard to say because contemporaries describe him as being this like swarthy, bestial guy from the plains, but the contemporaries that describe him like that, he was, their enemy and viewed in a, he was transformed into almost a demon from hell sent to exact God's vengeance. He was known as the Scourge of God. So they made him seem awful other. And again, all of our saga writers talk about him like he is, just another European great king of renown.
Right. And on top of this, there was a lot of that during the Romantic period to paint Attila as some, deeply foreign Easterner, especially when it came to the Russians, who are descended, or at least the Western Russians are descended from Swedes. And that fit, but then it continued on to apply to the Ukrainians, to the Polish, to the Lithuanians and Latvians,
to the Germans.
Yeah,
Hun was a common refrain in World War I.
It was thrown about. Yes,
if you're some primitive other from the East, you are the Hun.
Mm-hmm. So I really think that a lot of people do need to kind of step back from that a little bit. I think that still has residual effect, but so he goes down into Frankeland from Denmark, and there he marries Hjordis, who we know from the other story, and they have a son, Sigurd. And King Sigmund fell in battle fighting the sons of Hunding, and we talked about this as well with Hundingsbana and with the Volsunga Saga. So at that point, Hjordis marries Aulfur, son of King Hjalprek. Sigurd spent his childhood there, and that's where he learns from Regin. He learns the story of the treasure of Fafnir, the dragon. And there's going to be an interesting thing that I like in this story about the treasure in relation to the divine that's different elsewhere. So Sigurd is now living with his stepfather, Alvir. His mother and Alvir are in Frankeland, and he's growing up towards the destiny of carrying the blade that was passed on. He spent his childhood there. Sigmundur and all of his sons were far above all other men in strength, stature, intelligence, and all accomplishments. Well-rounded, strong, and intelligent. Deeply poetic, but also brutal. And these were, again, key factors. It was never just the whole trope of strong but dumb. And I think that a lot of people fall into that too often nowadays. And one, that's not really viable. I see it a lot with like Marines. They think that Marines are all dumb or something like that. But like every Marine I ever met while I was during the infantry, they were very smart folks that had a chip on their shoulder, but you could find them of all manners of talent. But again, we just kind of get into that for jokes. And here, no, it's washed away. If you're truly to be a hero, you're super well-rounded. However, Sigurd was the greatest of all of Sigmund's sons. And in the old tales, all men call him the greatest of all men and the noblest of kings. So that again, too, is reestablishing the accolades that every man listening to the poem would want to be foisted on him. I want to be known as the noblest of all my brothers. I want to be known as the strongest or the best of all of my father's children. And this, I think, really glimpses us all the way back to Proto-Indo-European tribal dynamics and what sons wanted. So Gripir was the name of Eilimi's son, the brother of Hjordis. Hjordis is Sigurd's mother. So this is his uncle. Again, another early Aryan, Pan-German, or Proto-Indo-European connection. Just like Lord Odin with his uncle Mimir, now we see another establishment. And remember, this is the younger poem, so these elements being brought in are tail end poems, still have them greatly reemphasized. So Gripir is the name of Hjordis's brother. He ruled over lands and was of all men the wisest and most forward-seeing. Sigurd once was riding alone and came to Gripir's hall. Sigurd was easy to recognize. He found out in front of the hall a man whose name was Geirr. Then Sigurd questioned him and asked. This is another thing that people might be noticing. So now we have kind of a mirroring with Mimir and Lord Odin, but we also see this when Lord Freyr sends Skirnir, and when Skirnir approaches Gerður, the hall of Gerður, outside is a herdsman. There's always kind of a gate warden. It influenced Christianity. This concept of a guardian of the gate is so mythologically important that eventually they do the whole Saint Peter is standing at the top of their gate. Thresholds are guarded, and that it seems in the stories that the gods don't move just willy-nilly between places, except for Lord Odin. Lord Odin does that, but he does it not so much out of dominion as he does it is the rules don't apply. He has the ability to kind of circumvent the laws that are. And in this case here, he's doing it in a physical sense. He meets this guard or gate warden. Then Sigurd questioned him and asked, "Who is it has this dwelling here? Or what do men call the people's king?" Now we're entering into the Fornidhislag poetic style. Gripir, the name of the chieftain good, who holds the folk and firm ruled land. Sigurd speaks again. Is the king all-knowing now within? Will the monarch come with me to speak? A man unknown his counsel needs, and Gripir fain I soon would find. And the guard, Gater, speaks. He says, the ruler glad of Gater will ask, who seeks with Gripir speech to have. So clearly speaking about his openness, his willingness to take a guest, is the hospitality is laid out. Sigurd then says, Sigurd am I, and Sigmund's son, and Hjordis the name of the hero's mother, he being the hero. Then Getur went and to Gripir spoke. A stranger comes and stands without. Lofty he is to look upon, and prince thyself he fain would see. So it's, again, kind of worth noting that Getur doesn't know that his lord's sister is this young man's brother. Is this young man's mother, excuse me. And he says to him again, from the hall the ruler of heroes went, and greeted well the warrior come. Sigurd, welcome. Long since has been thine. Now Gater shalt thou Grani take. So for people that might not remember, Grani is the horse. And in the Volsunga saga, Grani is descended from Sleipnir, the slipping one, the one that slips between. So here, it's again, he is mentioned. I love the fact that this is a continuation where the horses part of the story has kind of its own mythos. So then the king says, then of many things they talked, or excuse me, he doesn't say it. That's just interjected a narrator. Then of many things they talked, and when thus the men so wise had met, Sigurd spoke to me, if thou knowest, my mother's brother, say, what life will Sigurd be? So now he's asking for prophecy. And Gripir speaks, of men thou shalt be on earth the mightiest, and higher famed than all the heroes, free of gold giving, slow to flee, noble to see or to look upon, and a sage in your speech. So you will give much gold. You will be open-handed to your friends. You will never retreat from a fight. You will be noble to look upon and hold yourself with a sense of high esteem, and you will speak wisely. Sigurd then says, monarch wise, now more I ask. To Sigurd say, if thou thinkest to see, what first will chance of my fortune fair, when hence I go from out thy home? So what's going to happen to me once I leave this place? Gripir says, first shalt thou, prince, thy father avenge, and Eilimi, their ills requiting. The hardy sons of Hunding thou soon shall fell in victory find. So this is an ongoing, the Hundings are clearly seen as antagonistic, or the first hurdle to kind of be brought over. And he says that you will avenge your father and you will kill the sons of Hunding. As well, so does Helgi, Hundingsbana. Sigurd speaks again. Noble king, my kinsman, say thy meaning true, for our words we speak. For Sigurd mighty deed dost see, the highest beneath the heavens all. So now he's asking, what is the biggest, most pivotal? And of course, he does speak about what Sigurd is known for. In 11, he says, the fiery dragon alone thou shalt fight, that greedy lies in Njetihith. Thou shalt be of Rayan and Fafnir both, the slayer, truth, doth Gripir tell thee. Now, the reason why it's important to remember this is kind of a prequel in sense is because in the Volsunga saga, it wasn't until Sigurd heard the birds speaking, telling him that he was about to be slain by his companion, that he turns around and beheads him. So now, if this was known in that sense, Gripir has already prophesied this.
He's going in with his head on a swivel, manipulating situations to get the best out of Reagan, but knowing that it's going to end badly.
Right. And that's the thing is the way it's written, it could apply both ways. It could be that simply this is a different version or something of that, but you could absolutely overlay this into the original story. And it was, even though he knows what's coming or he has been told, you can't enact until the right moment, because without Rayan,
this is just
what's that?
You need his tricks and his helps. You need this uncomfortable alliance, but also, I mean, you praise the ice when it's crossed. This could be your uncle just telling you some nonsense. I think a lot of us have uncles that might have told them some nonsense.
Right.
My mother's brother did not always, lead me straight on things. So,
as a proud uncle, that is our job, is to tell them about this.
This one man's perspective.
Big fish.
But while I'm interrupting the flow, our folk builder in Florida, Alexander Casto, decided to donate $20 to Phrasehoff and bought us a coffee. So that's a $20 Phrasehoff donation and a $5 just for us donation. So thank you very much for that. We appreciate you. We appreciate everybody who's given on this program. A little bit here, a little bit there, but I don't know, we're probably getting close to $100 extra bucks on that Phrasehoff war chest since preparing for today's program.
Well, and there's something interesting in the bottom of the notes here. It speaks about Rayan being a dwarf or a dvurgar or a svart elf himself. But in the original story of the Volsunga saga, he's mentioned as being trained by the dwarves or knowing their secrets. So I think really interesting as well.
As stuff goes, this was, they theorized that this was in the 12th or even 13th century that this was written down. As you get into the medieval period, there's very often a magical midget that follows around knights and stuff. This is a time where courts would have dwarves for entertainment or for whatever, and they were odd. Any midgets in our audience? Sorry, it's a thing. I didn't do it, but you guys are fascinating. Just putting it out there, you are. And I think that the difference that was of interest, but you would frequently have somebody that would have as their, as a interesting, odd fellow that would follow them around and maybe have magical knowledge, maybe be treacherous, maybe be both, would often be portrayed in a dwarven fashion. And as the Middle Ages wore on, it was much more a midget than like an actual dvarder, like a you know, metaphysical dwarf. It was like, you know, a person who has, you know, achondroplasia that's waddling around doing midget stuff.
Well, and I think this kind of extends even into our age and day, where we take, let's say, a story is being spoken particularly.
I wish I had a midget that would like follow me around and stuff. That would be awesome.
I knew this is where this is going. No, I was
taking applications.
Oh, absolutely.
That comedian, I forgot his name, who's a midget, is phenomenal.
A lot of them go towards comedy.
Yeah.
Joe that I used to bounce with, he would do, like, he had little stand-up sets, little pun not intended, but he had these little stand-up sets that he would do.
Well, and again, people will lock in because of just the difference,
they're compelling, like the
fascination,
the rarity, and just the difference is certainly very interesting and compelling.
Well, and you don't see so much a deep connection where, like, say, amongst the Gauls, they had linkings to the idea that certain children were stolen by the Fae or the Seelie and replaced, and that's kind of how that comes about. Amongst the Germanics, there isn't a clear connection that the Dvergar and dwarf children of human like peoples, there's no like clear kind of connection.
I think that's a really tragic thing, and I don't like, legitimately, if we have little people that are listening to this program, you guys are really interesting. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but that was kind of if you didn't know and you didn't know medically, can you imagine how odd that would be if you and your wife conceived this child that was, as they grew up and developed, you know, seemed so very other and like something completely different from every other person you've probably ever seen in your life? I can easily see why that would give cause for some wondering what was going on there.
Yeah, and I just find it interesting that I can't really find any connections where the Germanics said, no, these Svartalvar or these Dvergar, you know, stole children or what have you. It just kind of sort of happened as the stories went along. But it's interesting because when you have the mainstay of a group, and then there is consistently the side or the wing person who is of
what was that guy's name in Labyrinth?
Hoggle.
All right, thank you. I'm glad that you knew that without further explanation.
Yeah, and then the funny joke is that everyone says his name wrong the entire time. Hogwart and what have you. But again, yeah, the idea is that there is this person or entity or being that might not even be human. They might be fairy or
with the power.
What's that?
Nothing. I'm responding to the chat on the screen.
Oh yeah, the babe with the power. What power? Well, and I think we see this too. There was, I can't remember exactly who it was, but someone was talking about how the Hollywood trope of, say, like in The Last Samurai, we have a folk man and he has his Japanese friend as a kind of key or gateway or guide. We see this in Robin Hood with Kazim. We see this again, even in, same actor too, but in Shawshank Redemption. So there's this trope there, and I think that this trope has existed in our blood, and that's something worth noting, that the way that we structure our stories is in our blood. It goes far back. Whether people want to claim it to be evil or not. It's obviously more about the shifting of political views. But the reality of it is that there was always the hero, and then the hero is guided by a fascinating, oftentimes other or enigmatic character, sometimes to their detriment, sometimes not. But I think that a lot of people don't realize that. And they don't realize that even this, for instance, with The Last of the Mohicans, you know, I forgot the author, he was clearly writing that as being, hey, like, we need to understand these people more. He was trying to be kind to the natives and want the Anglos to accept them or understand them more. I think he was painting that, and then later on, again, the same people like he was about preaching about acceptance and tolerance of other cultures. Eventually, later on, they're like, "Oh no, that's a white savior. He made a white savior." So it's kind of funny how they bent back around to bite themselves. But yeah, we see here again, this is really only for those who are utilizing the website. But yeah, and this is the first time I've ever seen it laid out that Reyin is a Dvergar. Anyway, so Gripir says, like, because Sigurd says, what is the big thing? What is the pinnacle? When I leave here, I'm gonna go and avenge my father. But what is the big thing that's going to define me as a hero? And he says, the fiery dragon, alone thou shalt fight. In Nita Heath. A heath, of course, is a place barren or grasslands. I need to look up Nita. But so he says, you shall be the slayer of both Fafnir and Reyin. Sigurd then speaks. He says, rich shall I be if battles I win with such as these, as now thou sayest. Forward look and further tell what the life that I shall lead. So that's kind of where we begin to see it laying out in a sense of prophetic. Look even further. Gripir speaks, Fafnir's den thou then shalt find, and all his treasure fair shalt take. Gold shalt heap on Grani's back, and proved in a fight to Gyuki fair. So you're going to gain riches from the dragon most of all, and but in that hoard of gold lies kind of the beacon of all the turmoil, all of the dark or murky, weird, the murky orlog that is going to pervade and cause so much trouble, as we read before. Sigurd speaks, to the warrior now, in words so wise, monarch, noble, more shall tell. I am Gyuki's guest, and thence I go. What the life that I shall lead? And then Gripir says, on the rocks there sleeps the ruler's daughter, fair in armor, since Helgi fell. Thou shalt cut with keen-edged sword and cleave the Berni with Fafnir's killer. So now we're speaking about Brynhild. He will go forth and he will cut her loose from the chainmail suit that is keeping her in a slumber. Sigurd speaks. The mail coat is broken, the maiden speaks. The woman whom from sleep has awakened. What says the maid to Sigurd then? That happy fate to the hero brings. And, you know, this poem being later on, it would almost be very similar to people that I don't know, a lot of folks might not remember, but a lot of folks might. But there was always kind of like when you were watching a series on television and they would do an episode that cut back to other episodes. That's kind of what's going on here. And I think a lot of this may have been done simply to give people an overarching understanding of the story, because they may not have had the joy of actually sitting and hearing the entirety of it spoken. So this poem, I think, has that function. So he says, after she wakes, what does she say? And Gripir says, runes to the warrior will she tell, all that men may ever seek, and teach thee to speak in all men's tongues, and life with health, thou'rt happy king. Sigurd then speaks, now is it ended, the knowledge is won, and ready am I forth hence to ride, forward look and further tell what the life that I shall lead. So, and a lot of people might be noticing he just is continually saying, what kind of life will I lead? What kind of life will I lead? But more or less what it's really translating to is, what else lays in the pathway of my life? It would be kind of a better way to look at it, as like that. And Gripir states, then to Heimir's home thou comest, and glad shall be the guest of the king. Ended, Sigurd is all I see, no further aught of Gripir ask. Sigurd speaks, sorrow it brings me the word thou sayest, for monarch, forward further thou seest, sad the grief for Sigurd thou knowest, yet not to me Gripir known will make. So he's lamenting, as Gripir says, speak no more. And it saddens him that he doesn't get a chance to speak any or see anymore, but it continues on. Gripir speaks in 21. Before me lay in clearest light all of thy youth for mine eyes to see. Not rightly can I wise be called, nor forward seeing. My wisdom is fled. Sigurd says, no man, Gripir, on earth I know, who sees the future as far as thou. Hide thou not, though hard it be, and base the deeds that I shall do. Gripir then speaks, with baseness never thy life is burdened. Hero noble, hold that sure, lofty as long as the word shall live, battle bringer thy name shall be. So I just found it kind of funny too, the essence of the word base or based or baseness in this reference here is congruent with the word like degenerate or unseemly. He says your life will never have baseless deeds. You will always be acting in nobility. Obviously, that's just the usage of words. Based meaning stable and strong, but in this case here, especially at the time of the translations, is they're referring more to based in a sense of based in animalism, versus the noble spirit, the noble Germanic Aryan spirit. Sigurd then says, "Naught could seem worse, but now must part. The prince and Sigurd, since so it is. My road, I ask, the future lies open. Mighty one, speak, my mother's brother." Gripir speaks, "Now to Sigurd, all shall I say, for to this the warrior bends my will. Thou knowest well that I will not lie. A day there is when thy death is doomed." So I've always kind of taken this as Gripir knows but doesn't want to speak. And as Sigurd is manifesting his will and pressing on, he's trying to further gain knowledge, and he's hungry for it. He wants to know more. I want to know more. I want to know more. And Gripir is like, "No, I won't speak anymore. I'm not going to take this. Let's just stop. We'll end here." And Sigurd continues on. And then he's like, "Well, naturally, all men are doomed." And so doomed, of course, meaning fated to die. And he says, "I will not lie. A day there is when thy death is doomed." Sigurd spoke, "No scorn I know for the noble king, but counsel good from Gripir I seek. Well will I know, though evil awaits, what Sigurd may before him see." So I'm not going to hold you accountable for what the things you've seen and the prophecy you are laying before me. I could never foster that towards you. What ill will or viltki, I think is what the translation here in relation to like evil or doom. Gripir says, "A maid in Heimir's home there dwells. Brynhild her name to men is known. Daughter of Búðli, the doughty king, and Heimir fosters the fearless maid." So this is a part two where the Valkyrier that is mentioned earlier in this poem, it doesn't deliberately connect them, and that Brynhild is or could be interpreted as a separate woman, but clearly we see it in the other story where she is both a Valkyrie and the daughter of a king. Sigurd then speaks, "What is it to me? Though the maiden be so fair, and of Heimir the fosterling is, Gripir, truth to me shalt tell, for all of fate before me now seest." Tell me the truth. You're laying this out. Why spare any? Shadow none of your words. And Gripir says, "Of many a joy the maiden robs thee. Fair to see whom Heimir fosters. Sleep thou shalt find not. Feuds thou shalt end not. Nor seek out men if the maid thou seest not." So she's going to be your doom. She's going to, and adding in the other story, she prophesizes the end. She does it reluctantly at first and doesn't want to proceed with him, but she's in love with him. And then when he unknowingly is convinced to marry another, it breaks her heart, and she turns immediately into an antagonistic force. Sigurd spoke, "What may be had for Sigurd's healing? Say now, Gripir, if see thou canst, if you can see, may I buy the maid with the marriage price, the daughter fair of the chieftain famed? Can I meet the dowry of this noble woman? And he says this even after Gripir says, when you meet her, this is going to mark the end. The feuds you get into will be left unsettled. There will be no men to follow you, and your end will be because of her. And he says, but still, will I be able to pay the dowry of this princess and wed her? Gripir says in 31, ye twain shall all the oaths then swear that bind full fast. Few shall ye keep. One night, when Gjuki's guest thou hast been, will Heimir's fosterling fade from thy mind. So right there, he's telling you're going to make a bonded oath with her, and it will fall in two pieces. And that in the same spans of time that you have sworn to her, once you become a guest of Heimir, it will fall from your mind. And I could see this as almost being like this verse as almost offensive in the sense of it, because it's not explained that he's tricked. Sigurd then speaks, what sayest thou, Gripir? Give me the truth. Does fickleness hide in the hero's heart? Can it be that troth I break with the maid, with her I believed I loved so dear? So that's kind of the response to that, is because he doesn't tell him he's being tricked. He tells him that he's going to break his oaths. And warriors don't do that. And why would they do that to one that they loved? The noble oath that he would make to wed her. And then he says, tricked by another, prince thou art, and the price of Grimhild's wiles thou must pay. Fame to thee for the fair-haired maid, her daughter she is, and she drags thee down. Sigurd speaks, might I with Gunnar kinship make, and Gudrun win to be my wife? Well, the hero wedded would be, if my treacherous deed would trouble me not. So remember, this poem is referencing and bridging huge parts of a giant poem together in a very sleek package. But I like the fact that he's kind of the poet is giving background feeling and thought, especially considering at this point in the story, Sigurd would be maybe 15 years old. He's a young man, and he's very idealistic about the way he perceives the world before he truly gets thrown into the maelstrom of it. And so he asks, will I make a kinship with Gunnar, her brother, and win Gudrun as the wife, despite my treachery? So that's, again, just interesting, but I think that's the point, is he's bridging the gap of this. And Gripir spoke, holy Grimhild, thy heart deceives. She will bid thee go and Brunhild woo for Gunnar's wife, the lord of the Goths, and the prince's mother thy promise shall win. So he says, not only will you break the bond of love that you have with Brynhild, you'll be tricked, you'll be deceived, and you will fall, and you will fall for Gudrun. But it's Gudrun's mother, Grimhild, who will send you out to win Brynhild for her own son. And Sigurd then says, evil waits me. Well, I see it. And gone is Sigurd's wisdom good. If I shall woo for another to win the maiden fair that so fondly I loved. Gripir speaks, then he says, ye three shall all the oaths then take, Gunnar and Hogni and Hero, thou, your forms ye shall change, as forth ye tear Gunnar and thou, for Gripir lies not. So not only is there the oaths of love and turning against and wooing a woman for another, the brotherhood of oaths to Gunnar will also be ripped asunder. Sigurd speaks, how meanest thou? Why make we the change of the shape and form as forth we said? There must follow another falsehood, grim in all ways. Speak on, Gripir. Gripir speaks, the form of Gunnar and the shape thou gettest, but the mind and the voice thine own remain. The hand of the fosterling, noble of Heimir, now dost thou win, and none can prevent. So he takes the shape of Gunnar to woo this woman, but ultimately it leads to the erosion of their brotherhood. Sigurd speaks, most evil it seems, and men will say, base in Sigurd, that so he did. Again, unseemly, unhonorable that Sigurd would do such a thing. Not of all my will shall I cheat with wiles, the hero's maiden whom noblest I hold. So that kind of even emphasizes more of the tragedy of this all. Gripir speaks, thou dwellest, leader, lofty of men, with the maid as if thy mother she were, lofty as long as the world shall live, ruler of men, thy name shall remain. So in essence, he's also saying, despite the baseless nature or the unseemliness of all of these actions, your deeds will still be remembered. Sigurd spoke, shall Gunnar have a goodly wife, famed among men? Speak forth now, Gripir. Although at my side 3 nights she slept, the warrior's bride, such never has been. And Gripir speaks, the marriage draught will be drunk for both, for Sigurd and Gunnar in Gyuki's hall. So the marriage draught, the in our marriage ceremonies, there is generally 3 oaths that are taken, and one is over the horn, the other is an exchange, and then the third is the rings, the oath of the rings. So this is the marriage draught that they're speaking of. But in essence, the horn will be passed to 2 couples that day. For Sigurd and Gunnar in Gyuki's hall, your forms ye change when home ye fare, but the mind of each to himself remains. So you do this deed for him, but now you can no longer forget what you have done in wooing Brunhild. You just forgot who Brunhild was before you did this. Sigurd then speaks, shall the kinship new thereafter come to good among us? Tell me, Gripir, to Gunnar joy shall it later give, or happiness send for me myself? So another thing that's really interesting here is he is deeply concerned with the way a close friend will feel about him, that he doesn't turn on his friend. He doesn't want to be seen as a person who stabs his friend in the back. His loyalty is strong, but he doesn't quite understand how all of this is going to play out. Gripir speaks, thine oaths remembering silent thou art, and dwellest with Gudrun in wedlock good. But Brynhild shall deem she is badly mated, and whiles she seeks herself to avenge. So you will remain with Gudrun in your knowing, but Brynhild will remember everything. Sigurd then speaks, what may for the bride requital be? The wife we won with subtle wiles? From me she has the oaths I made, and kept not long. They gladden her little. Gripir then speaks, to Gunnar soon his bride will say, that ill didst thou thine oath fulfill, when the goodly king, that son of Giuki, with all his heart the hero trusted. So now he's saying, your friend is going to turn at you and say that you broke the friendship and you were the one that twisted things, even though he was the one that clearly asked Sigurd to take his shape and form and jump over the fire. Sigurd then says, what sayest thou, Gripir? Give me the truth. Am I guilty so, as now is said, or lies does the far-famed queen put forth of me and herself, yet further speak? In wrath and grief, full little good, the noble bride shall work thee now. No shame thou gavest the goodly one, though the monarch's wife with wiles didst cheat. So he's free of blame, but she is the component. And this is, of course, talking about Grimhild, the mother, and her machinations for her son and for her daughter. Shall Gunnar the wise to the woman's words? Will he suddenly realize that his mother has been treacherous? And Gotthorm and Hogni then give heed? Shall Giuki's sons now tell me, Gripir, redden their blades with their kinsman's blood? Heavy it lies on Gudrun's heart, when her brothers all shall bring thee death. Never again shall she happiness know. The woman so fair, 'tis Grimhild's work. And then Sigurd then says, now fare thee well, our fates we shun not. And well has Gripir answered my wish. More of joy to me wouldst tell of my life to come, if thou couldst. Ever remember, ruler of men, that fortune lies in a hero's life. A nobler man shall never live beneath the sun than Sigurd shall seem. So it abruptly ends, and it doesn't go too much further past his death, and that makes perfect sense since Sigurd is alive, but there is a great amount that does happen after. But he just speaks of woe and tragedy, and there is no real resolve spoken in this poem. But he still says, your deeds will be held in the highest esteem, and no man more nobler will ever be spoken of like you. So even despite the fame, there's fame, but great tragedy that's going to come out of it. And Sigurd says, we cannot avoid the things that happen to us. We must go forth boldly, despite even knowing the truth. And that's it, right?
Yep.
All of it.
So some of these are longer than others. Some of them are kind of short as we finish up. But yeah, this is an interesting perspective, and also I think as good a time as any to hearken back to the Allfather's advice in the Have 'em All, that it's best to be middling wise.
Oh, yeah.
You want to know this kind of stuff if there's something you can do to avoid something or make it better. But if there's not, what a burden to start out at the beginning of your life. Like, hey, I'm a young man just hitting the road. Hey, uncle, you know prophecy. Tell me about what's going to happen to me. That's, perhaps a blessing, but also certainly a curse. Knowing over much or knowing more than is necessary to know is certainly burdensome, and I think we are advised to not open certain doors a lot of the time for that reason. I've got a few questions tonight. Folkbuilder Ron Boardman wants to know, what was the highest of highlights from Midsummer at Odenshof? I overthink these questions, Ron, when you're like, what is the best thing of a really good weekend? I'm like, well, this was cool, but this other thing was also. So I don't know. I will say one big highlight for me was leading Odinblot on Friday night. It's always a tremendous honor to represent the folk giving bloat to the Allfather. I feel like it was a very powerful bloat, and so I'm going to claim that as the highlight. But for me, there were lots of cool highlights. If you watch the slideshow coming out, there's a pretty big awkward rock that's, I think someone said it was about 110 or 115 pounds, that was very awkward to lift from the ground up over one's head, and got kind of challenged into doing that. And I was happy that I was able to do that successfully. Anybody that might not know, my right arm doesn't lock out all the way. My elbow on the right arm has significant joint damage over the years. So I couldn't get that lockout on that side. So I'm like, man, without resting it bone on bone, can I hold it up? But I did, and it was cool. Few of our men were able to do that, which was really neat. It's always just great to, the folks at Odenshof have taken such care of the Hof and spent, all of us have spent so much time in worship and devotion and fellowship in that place. It's very special to share that with people and to see how people who are experiencing that from the first time react and take it all in. So that was another, always a very big highlight. Svan has returned to us.
Yeah, sorry, I had to use the restroom. Coffee.
Svan, are Christians evil?
That's an interesting question. Are they European Christian? No, I'm only kidding. So, are Christians evil? One, I would say on the base level, no, not at all. People of faith, we need to look at people of faith. There is a kinship that we have with them in the sense of faith, as opposed to people who have no faith. And I'm not saying that people with no faith are entirely evil either, but that is a clear and differentiated point. Are they misguided? I think that's a better point to say. And can they be so misguided that they build themselves up into a fervor? Or are they infected by Fenris's slobber or his spit? As we spoke about before, the power of just absolute intense levels of this kind of fanaticism that we can see coming out of religions that uniquely are from the Middle East. Probably coincidence, but we see these kind of levels of we even see it today when they're, when we're in power, we're burning all of these people, or we're getting rid of all of these people. And they often project that too on us. I've seen that as well. I've seen where it's like, oh, we can't let these guys get in power. They'll destroy everything. And I don't think that's the case. I think that there is, in Asatru, there is an understanding of our people's history with Christianity that has a sense of respect, a sense of understanding. We the respect, even though all of our heroes, many of them have been slain for not converting and holding true to the gods. One of the things that we could still look at is the writing and how that helped in so much. The oral tradition started to go away, and there became a writing tradition that was clearly brought in. But is that Christian or is that Hellenic? It's kind of hard to tell the difference, especially in European Christianity, where Hellenic philosophers begin, and Christians and Christians take a lot of that from the Greek philosophers and just, that's ours. That's what we do. That's why we are the way they are. But clearly they were not like that before kind of immersing themselves in Greece. I think it ultimately depends on their actions that determines whether or not we should deem them evil or good. They are clearly outlandish to us, but all of them have a possibility of coming home. And we should not stop ourselves from trying to bridge that gap. And it's going to take a lot. One of the things is that it's like asking, is a man who is afraid for his life evil for trying to do things to assuage that fear? They have a deep-seated fear of the Gehenna, of the Jewish afterlife so much. They want to avoid it so deeply, and they work so hard to maintain that covenant that they will do anything they can. And does that fear make them evil? I can't lay that acquisition down on them so swiftly.
So I'd like to make a point that kind of ties this into tonight's story. A persistent theme was, no, uncle, I would never do something like that. That's dishonorable. How could you say that? No, you were tricked. You didn't know better. You got put under a spell. Christianity is a spell that's been cast on our folk for a very long time. Were the original white people who abandoned our gods to become Christians evil? Yes. Even the term evil, so a couple of things.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Evil implies a knowing doing something that you know is bad or malevolent. No, cowards are not evil necessarily. Cowardliness can lead to evil, but cowardliness is disgusting to our folk. There were a lot of really evil crimes that were acknowledged and you're hung in public square in our ancestors' day. But cowardice wasn't one of those. Cowardice, you got stomped into the bog so nobody had to remember that you existed because the concept of you is gross. So there are, again, people who killed their own kin because of trying to force Christianity on them, those people are evil. We're all aware of people who, under the guise of Christianity, abuse and harm children sexually or otherwise. Those people are evil. But no, I think that as a general rule, most of the people that you know today that are Christians, especially in proportion to their Christianity, aren't evil. They're people that want to do the right thing, that are religiously inclined and trying to be pious and don't know any better. They have been cast into with some kind of a spell of not remembering who they are and where they came from. And until they wake up from that, they don't know any better. They're trying to be virtuous and good. And for the last, 1,000 years, that's what that has meant for white people, was to be good Christians in whatever that was understood to be. So no, I don't think Christians are evil. I think there have been certainly plenty of evil Christians, but I think most people who follow Christianity don't do so out of malevolence or bad intention. They just don't know any better. And it's been so interwoven into Western culture for the last 1,000 years that it's hard for them to separate, to use one of theirs, to separate the wheat from the chaff. So yeah, no, I don't think they're evil. I think they're certainly evil Christians, but I don't think as a rule Christians are evil. Wrong, and our spiritual foes in a lot of ways, yes. There's this, so something else that we need to, is now's as good a time as any to make the point. We get pushed in a strange situation when dealing with Christianity. Christians who are supportive of us and what we do and supportive of their partners being Asatru are convenient for us. They're nice to us. I think they are prospects for us to convert and bring back home to Asatru, but they are fundamentally bad Christians. If you are a Christian and you support your spouse being Asatru and you're okay with Asatru, you are a bad Christian. I don't think the solution is for you to become a better Christian, but you already got your foot halfway out the door. You should go ahead and make the leap and come back home. Question from Austin. Hello, Ausherjagothi Matt and Witan Svan. A question for both. What is the frenzy? How does Odin relate to frenzy? And how might an Asatruar use it? Thank you for what you do. Well, you're very welcome. Svan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, pause for a sec before I do that. Caitlin bought us coffee. It's a $5 donation. Thank you, Caitlin. We appreciate it.
And yes, you're welcome as well. This is amazing. People's giving hands. But this is a great question, because a lot of people hear this. They'll say they hear frenzy, they hear ecstasy, and words have meaning, and words sometimes change over time. And a lot of folks might think it's such an easy word to understand, but they don't understand the context. And to ask the question might seem out of place, and I think this is a really good one. When we talk about frenzy or ecstasy or elevated state of mind, we could look at perhaps what it isn't first to define what it is. You courage versus cowardliness or what have you, but I'm going to try to not get into too long-winded that way. I think what it truly is about mastering the self to such a way or such a degree that you can let loose, you can break down barriers that define the rulings, whether that's in the sense of the body or in the sense of the mind. And I think that's what it was about with, say, the berserker or the Ulfhidnar and the poet. There was this overwhelming sense of release, connectivity. There was a breaking down of all the machinations and strategy, and just entering into this state where you become purely connected to the energy source, the flow that's coming through you. And that's why Lord Odin is, it's that reaching to him and asking him to, in essence, carry you over that torrent river. And it would happen in poetry with skalds when they were telling the stories, when they were speaking the poetry, they would begin to have the hands go numb, the words start just flowing out of their mouth in almost a magical sense. And they even cease to think about the verse that's coming next. They know it. It's, we see this a lot when people are racing, when people are singing, where there's these transcendent moments, or when they're, again, on the physical side, when someone is running or when someone is doing a feat of great strength, and all of the doubt disappears from them and they become this just pure moment. And I think that really is where Lord Odin is looking. If we talk about the cycle of the soul, one of the key factors that really sticks out and that most everybody focuses on is Lord Odin and Valhall. But that isn't the entirety of the process. That's the entirety, according to a lot of people after the fact. They didn't understand the beyond the veil, the realm of the ancestors, ascension, being placed into places, hierarchy, Disir, Alvar, so on and so forth. Instead, they saw it simply as when they died, they believed they went straight to Valhall without any consideration of the word Val, meaning chosen. And so Lord Odin is choosing the souls that are powerful, that shine beyond, that go. So, I mean, you could take it to a level of reaching a sense of, I would say, Germanic nirvana. And I just say that because I don't want to culturally context it in an Eastern sense. But it is this kind of transcendence. But it wasn't a one and done. It wasn't like a one moment thing. It was seen as something that could be attained. And then if you were chosen by Lord Odin at a time of this transcendence, then so be it. Or you could have reached these transcendent points throughout your life, and then when you pass, your deeds, your word, the honoring of you, speaking about these transcendent moments, you get pulled up after. So I think one of the things to understand is it's not like becoming a Buddha or something where it's just all of a sudden. No, it's breaking through the veil of the ignorance of your mind and of your flesh as a being here, and you kind of touch the divine, whether it's the mead of poetry or whether it's the absolute fervor of the berserker or the Ulfhidnar. And it gets confusing because we see that with the skalds, but it's not emphasized as being a concept. And then the other is that the berserker was demonized later as being kind of a dumb, ruffian, pagan trope. But I think that the idea of being able to not feel wounds and to not fear death speaks about what was more common is the fear of getting hit with arrows and swords and spears. and transcending above that. Or in the poetic sense is the fear of not knowing how to lace the words together, to meld the poem, to memorize things. And then suddenly there's that transcendent moment above it. And it's like sipping from Kvasir's blood. It's the mead of poetry flows in you, or the divine inspiration of Lord Odin ignites you. And that's when you reach and attain the frenzy or the ecstaticism. Oh,
there we go.
Yeah.
What Svan said. So, there is a saying and an understanding I think many of us have encountered and seen the truth of in real life. The line between inspiration and madness is like paper thin, and you will meet crazy people that all of a sudden have a moment where they'll look at you and they'll say something that's extremely profound because they know stuff. They also know about methamphetamines and craziness. That's always been a thing. There is something that occurs, and I think that this gets achieved through a lot of different ways. People will achieve it through ordeal. You can achieve transcendent states through extreme circumstance. You can also achieve them with psychedelics or through ritual or through moments of interaction with the divine. There are things in life that transcend your normal mode of being, and you get in a frenzy. Yes, when a crazy person has a crazy episode, that is a form of frenzy. When an artist just goes nuts and has to sit there and do their art until it's done and they're crazy and, difficult to be around, that's a form of that. On the battlefield, Svan talked about the Berserk or the Ulfhednar or those kind of things where you literally lose yourself and you transform. There are things, and I think that most of us have experienced this in a small way, and we need to specify there is frenzy or transcending your normal state that is divine, and there is some that is just you're on drugs or you're on whatever substances you're on that help you, or maybe you're having a chemical imbalance. All of these things can happen, and there can be overlap between all of these things. Frenzy can be when a bipolar person is on their manic cycle. When something transcendent occurs that takes you beyond the norms of your regular existence, and you are being pulled by seemingly external forces to do things, that's a part of that frenzy. In a divine way, when you interact with something so much greater than you are and so far beyond you, it can be hard to interact with that and maintain your sanity at the same time. Maybe for a moment, maybe it breaks your head in general and you're just chattering in the corner about prophecy or something for the rest of the time. Now, those are really, really extreme examples. It's probably not the norm that you're going to encounter. But I think we've all seen this a little bit when you get drunk and you're still you, but you're certainly not functioning under the same boundaries and limitations that you are normally under, there's something to that. And it's one of the reasons that our ancestors would often drink very heavily to have their meetings and their discussions amongst friends and amongst leaders, and come up with really, seemingly at the time, really cool stuff. But they'd always make sure they conferred about it the next day when everybody was clear-headed to confirm that it was a good idea or not. But something transcendent can happen at that. Where the way I think that relates to the Allfather is Odin is the master of ecstasy, the master of frenzy. So he rides the frenzy in control. And that's, I think, profound. That mastery of self, to where you can go on such a journey, but be in control of yourself to keep it between the lines and make sure you're exercising your will, even while you're in the throes of ecstatic inspiration. That's some top tier man skills there that I think are really important to think about. You see wolves very seldom in positive contexts in our lore. Not never, but seldom, because they are the embodiment of like ravenous, uncontrolled, violent, devouring hunger and obsession and things like that. And I think it's really significant that Freki and Gary are Odin's pets that curl up nicely at the foot of his throne, and he feeds them, the food that's offered to him because he's only drinking the wine. His ability to master these creatures of frenzy and keep them at bay and keep them tamed is, I think, very informative about that. So there is an art to interacting with the other, the divine, the transcendent, while maintaining your will. And that's, an art of the accomplished Gothi or the accomplished Vitki in a way. But you see it in the lore experienced in different ways, and you see it in life experienced in different ways. There are certain barriers in your brain that keep you logical, but that also prevent you from experiencing the fullness of condition. And sometimes, various drugs, alcohol, hallucinogenics break those barriers down. There are techniques to where fasting or ordeal or like there's some intensive breathing methods that also can break those things down a bit and let you glimpse the other. But there are some people that naturally have the ability to access that other part of themselves. And people who, very often women, but not always, who have the ability to have second sight, to have a much more viscerally transcendent experience where they see the things beyond the veil in a different way, in a much more palpable way. There's also instances where, the gods can override that by making themselves more in your face on the message that they're trying to interact with you. Now, those people who experience that are a very fortunate few. But I think that that's what some of that is about. And I think this is also an interesting aside on that theme. The rune Kaun or Kinaz is interesting to me in that regard. And I just it clicked for me this last year in a special way. We always hear it, in Asatru, and I say we always hear. Old people like Svan and I have heard throughout our time coming into Asatru about, Kinaz meaning torch. We don't find that a lot in the lore. What we find a lot is the concept of it meaning like an ulcerated sore, like something that's like a burning pain internally, or burning like wound that hurts. And that's always seemed kind of gross and not really cool to me. The torch thing sounded awesome, and that's kind of what I wanted it to mean. But the more I study, the more I'm constantly confronted with that ulcer idea. But it clicked to me that that's a form of that frenzy. When you get literally, it gets it described. We have a lot of reference to it in our culture, but the fire in the belly, when you have a burning desire to accomplish something, that idea of that burning desire, when you burn with motivation to do something, with hunger, with lust, with ambition, or just with inspiration, to where you know something needs to get out, and you are literally have a burning sensation to push you forward to complete something that you have conceived must be accomplished. And I think in a lot of the ways that speaks towards that divine frenzy is inspiration in that burning and visceral sense. But Odin not just is the master of the frenzy, he is also a god of inspiration, and he is one who inflicts that frenzy. He inflicts that inspiration, be it poetic, be it in the terms of the ambitions of kings and warlords, or of poets and songwriters, or of, priests and prophets that need to structure our faith and bring our folk home, in a lot of those different ways. So it's a long-winded, multifaceted answer, but I do think Odin lends himself towards that, as does his, ecstatic fury.
I wanted to say, because something you just said at the end, kind of, he said, how do Asatru use that today? And what you were talking about, Lord Odin being inspiration, hit me as, that's, I think, one of the key components that we, in our fervor, in our frenzy, in our ecstatic states, can do, is inspire others, because the soul sickness is making people spiritually confused, sometimes completely wandering off, and burning bright and having that devotion, seeing an Odin's bloat and getting kind of pulled into understanding what's going on around you, but it's like a flashing hot moment, I think has a lot of power for people, that cuts through the din of a lot of what modernity is kind of placing on us.
Let that inspiration get you off the couch. What does that do, and how is that used by modern Asatru? It depends on your inclination, your orientation, and your capacity. But very often it's to do something, and you can sit there and literally drive yourself insane in the terms of this, wondering, what should I do? Not nothing. And I've ran into that on a couple of things. Don't wait for the perfect answer. Get up and do something. Do the imperfect something until the more perfect something appears. But getting out there and participating, sticking with it, and moving it forward, that's what can be done. As far as our Gothar, actively engaging, regularly gifting the gods in the gift cycle, and genuinely seeking their inspiration and their wisdom in how to proceed, and then throwing themselves wholly into the process of building and spreading our faith and building our faith and making this stuff happen. It is utilized by me to be unbearably obnoxious to all of my colleagues, to try to, by sheer will and annoyance,
over the mountain.
force people to get stuff done. By the concept of this show, that's the idea that victory never sleeps. I can't be still. I can't stop. I have to make the best out of the life I have here in Midgard to carry this ball and carry Asatru and build it as bright and as glorious as I possibly can, or as it possibly can be under my direction in the time that I have that tremendous honor and very rare opportunity. So, going with it and getting stuff done. Accomplishment is the cure to most all things. Go out and accomplish and do. So Nick put this in here as a question. It's kind of a statement, but we'll read it and respond to it. Also from folk builder Ron Boardman, what is a common thread throughout Germanic lore is that the hero embraces his fate, whatever it is. Svan, reflect. Oh, before you do, pause for a sec. Sarah bought us 5 coffees. It's $25 donation. Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate it. She says, good evening, Allsherry Gothi and Witan Svan. Good conversation this evening. Hail victory. Hail victory.
Hail victory.
I feel like that was an attack on me about it not being an actual question. It was just a word.
It's not a real question. It's a statement, but I think it's fine for us to give some opinions on.
It started with a question word. That's all I saw.
It did start with a question word. I think that was a rhetorical question word. But that's okay. We'll still respond to it because I think it's a good point to be made.
Yeah, when we see the argument between will and fate continually coming up in our faith, and the ultimate point of that is, despite fate, whatever fate may be, it is the gods that know, it is the Norns that know, but that men should press forward and attain their will and drive on. Not just accept what is coming, but to, in essence, your fate is your will. And so your will is the only thing you can control. So you should concern yourself with that and that alone. And that is how you drive forward. I really like it because it is, I think, something that we often discuss and debate and wonder about, if there's a fatalism, or how does our will fit into things when, if it's already fated, it doesn't matter. But that's the whole point, and it's been here since the beginning. Our ancestors said, even the gods may know more than we do. They certainly do, but in the poems, they may know more than we do, but it is irrelevant to the deeds of what you must. You can't just lay down, curl up, and die. A hero goes forward, laughing, attempting to attain, attempting to commit himself to action. And I see that a lot. I think I see that. And the tragedy of this day and age is that a lot of people talk about doing things but don't physically do things, and that is sad. And there are a lot more people, showing up and doing things, but there's, again, equally a number of people who are standing on the sidelines and scorning people, even though those people showed up, and these people never left their house. So, the attainment of your fate, the only way that you can truly live the fullness of your fate is through your will. So go out and do.
That is, one of the very ultimate expressions of heroism, is rising to the occasion, even in the face of overwhelming odds and likelihood of, failure. There is honor in the struggle. There is dignity and heroism in making stuff happen and in doing the right thing regardless of the cost. The ability, we talked about transcendence in terms of frenzy. There is a transcendent quality when the hero is able to implement right action without regard to consequence. And that's said a lot. There are things that are expected of the hero regardless of what the consequence may be. So you go out there, you roll the dice, and you see what happens. And that's a part of the concept of Valhalla is, it's not, and I think that it gets taken too far, but it's not for the winners. And you're not excluded if you fall. Some of the people that fall on the battlefield are the people that the Allfather most wants in his company, because they went out there and did their part regardless, knowing what they were up against. They still chose to go out there and show up. So there's that. Are there AFA members who are married to or dating Christians or atheists or people of other beliefs? Svan.
Yes. We've met. Okay, so wait, let's go back a little further. It was a common thing with Asatru being newly revitalized. People were coming back for various reasons, whatever inspired them, and it was generally seen that you would have the man of the couple is Asatru, and the woman of the couple is, some sort of kind of quasi spiritualist, crystal, witchy, whatever. And it was always kind of like that way. It was you would not see the crystal fuzzy bunny hippie guy with his witchy girlfriend. It was always a very strong and stout, forward focusing towards Asatru or towards the gods, and the masculinity there. And then there was this, they were going for masculine men, even in the whole, I guess, postmodern Marxist view of the feminine religion, goddess worship or what have you. I've always found that kind of intriguing and funny in a lot of ways.
Pause for 1 second. I see it over in the chat, and I want to recognize it before we go further. Daughter of the West, I love that. I absolutely love that. Says, I am, I can, I ought, I will. I teach that to my children. It's a motto in our home. That's amazing. And it's the first time I've seen it put that succinctly or in that way. And I'm really glad you reinforced that with your children. Well done. Carry on.
Yeah, no. And just the premise of will and fate. And it's very funny because I would view, I think, the dichotomy between us, as Hergo, is very focused on the will, and I am, and always have been, kind of focused on the fate. And I remember us having long discussions about the difference between the two and how they interplay with each other. Especially I take great stock in runic divinatory practices. So that again is this skein of fate, but everything's being influenced by will. And I find it such an interesting thing. And it is kind of, the dichotomy that plays out between us. But the couples, getting back to couples. Yes, I have met plenty of Asatruer who have non-religious loved ones in their marriage, or they have, like you said, kind of in truth, bad Christians, because Christians by their faith and doctrine speak about, not being with those people. I mean, and we've spoken before. Jesus even said, "I come, not as a peacemaker, but I bring a sword to sever the relationship between father and son and mother and daughter." And what they're talking about in that Bible verse is that their faith will break even the bonds of kinship, which kind of does set the motif for it just in general. And the more hard-lined they are, that has more prevalence. But there is, of course, the way that Christianity has evolved to keep more people. If it's that hard, that rigid, it's going to lose a lot of people, where they accept Asatru or pre-Christian holidays and things, and they kind of turn a blind eye or ramp up the fear when they need to. It's more of a control volume as opposed to just turning it up the whole time. But you find them married, or I like to call them cultural Christians. Their parents are Christian. They went to church. And the big thing is they just don't want to go to the bad place in Judaism. And that's pretty much it. And then they might ramp it up to, I'm going to accept this rabbi from the Middle East as my Mashiach, or the Mashiach of the Israelites, but also me. And then eventually it ramped up to, we are the new Israelites. And then it just keeps going and going depending on how hardline they are. But at a certain point, I generally see that there's, for those who are accepting of the faith of their loved ones, as they get to know more of the traditions of Asatru, they kind of parallel themselves in there. They kind of merge because there is a familiarity that, like in Christianity, there's a familiarity, but then as you dig and dig and dig, it's not very long before you start learning about Zebekiah and the Edomites and all of these kind of Middle Eastern politics going on. It's a lot of folks, when they reach that point in the delve down, that's their break zone. The light starts to dim and they're like, I'm not going to go into all of that. Those that do press on, they lose, or they have to place themselves in that realm, and they're not of that realm. But when they come into Asatru, there is no break-off point. It's like everything we're doing has been with our people for as long as we've been. So it makes perfect sense what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it's okay. And my kids are doing good and everything's, that's where I think a lot of that kind of comes in. So I generally see most folks that come into our faith, if they've been searching, oftentimes they are men, but I have met more women in the Asatru Folk Assembly than I ever have before, just in a kind of broad sense of Asatru, where they were initiating things. Their motherhood was kicking in, or something was going on, and they were like, my husband's not there yet, but I'm Asatru, and I've seen that a lot, surprisingly. And generally, the other partner will either stay completely away, and that's out of laziness, disinterest, materialism, but very rarely is it out of conviction for their religion over their partner's religion.
Sometimes it's out of denial. It's out of like, let's pretend that's not a real thing. Oh, that's just something silly they're doing. That's just
right. It's a hobby for them.
So one thing to consider on this, people come to Asatru at different points in their life. If you come home to Asatru and you find yourself in a relationship with someone who is not Asatru, that doesn't bar you from being a member and participating in the AFA. The hope is that you will bring your partner into becoming Asatru. But we have a number of people that found this at different points in their life and have long-standing relationships with people who are not Asatru. And we don't, try to break up families or encourage people to, do that. That's not required of you. But it's certainly a better option for you to, if you are single now, date Asatru, build relationships with Asatru, marry Asatru, build your family with Asatru. If you, and we see this a lot, and we see it often with guys. We have our men today that get very desperate and they make poor decisions because they are lonely and often hopeless and just want to have someone. And I get that. I'm not talking down to that. I understand that. I can see myself falling into that. I have been very, very fortunate in my life that hasn't been my situation, and that, I found Mandy at an AFA event and it worked out beautifully and in a storybook way. And I'm very blessed because of that. But it could have gone a different way where I get that. I don't like to be alone. I understand it. It is worth it to take your time and make good decisions. One of the most foul curses I have seen upon our folk is these men that make, men and women that make poor choices on who they have babies with, and then they have to deal with truly awful custody disputes that don't let them live their life fully or raise their children as they know they ought to. And that's really sad, and I wouldn't wish that on any of you. To that end, the AFA does not, our Gothar do not perform weddings as a rule for couples unless both members are Asatru. Not just Asatru, but Asatru and AFA members. That is to ensure the idea that your marriage is built right from the moment of inception of that marriage, and so that our church and our gods are invited in and a integral part of that relationship from that day forward. And that's really important to us. I get it. I know there's plenty of guys listening to this, but man, maybe I got with this girl and I could convince her. Cool. Convince her before you get in a long-term relationship with her and you plan a life with her. If you can, through your studliness, convert the ladies, bring them home to Asatru, more power to you. But it's really easy to get caught up and not be able to break the shackles that a relationship puts you in, and then make compromises that don't allow you to be your true self or to live authentically. I've seen people that found themselves, she'll come around, one of these days she'll see the truth and she'll come home to Asatru. And I've seen men waste decades of their life not being able to live authentically because they are not in a position or are too weak to take a spiritual lead in their home. And that's really unfortunate. Don't find yourself there. Don't do that. Now, it's a different prospect to find somebody who's not particularly religious and then incorporate them into what we do and to bring them in. I think that's got a lot better route to success than somebody who is a committed Christian. But as I said earlier in the broadcast, good Christians don't want to date you. Good Christians are offended by your existence and you are an idolatrous or a demon worshiper, and they don't want to have anything to do with you. If they do, they are to one degree or another bad Christians. I suppose that's a start to like, hey, how about you just come on home to Asatru instead? Svan mentioned earlier, if you are a real Christian and you know your Bible, you know those things, and you're comfortable and you're full in on the little hat Jewishness of Christianity. If you're not, then very often you've got your, it's that movie from Dogma where you got your like buddy Jesus that is just your imaginary friend that approves of all the stuff you do and is your homie. And that's not real Christianity. They should probably get rid of that and come home to something that's authentic.
Or they double down and it's like, we're the lost tribe of the Israel.
Oh yeah, then they go, yes,
in the other direction.
We was Jews.
Right. Which a lot of people do, whether it's the Black Israelites
it is amazing what mental gymnastics people can go through because we always avoid, and this goes back to our thing we just said about the hero. We want to avoid discomfort so bad. And this is okay. So this is another random blame it on the Moscato, whatever thing that we're going into here. But to fundamentally evaluate your core beliefs and make necessary changes when you know things to be true or things to be wrong, that's hard. And it's very uncomfortable. And it can reshuffle your relationships with your family and with your loved ones. It can reshuffle your place in the world. And the longer you live wrong and the later in life you discover it, man, I'm 70 and everything I've been doing for the last 70 years is the wrong way to go. That is a hard thing to mentally wrap your head around. And I think we see that with boomers and the news and political stuff and a variety of things. Technology, they don't want to broaden their horizons on a lot of things because it's terrifying. So it's amazing the kind of mental nonsense we'll go to not upset the paradigm that we're comfortable in. Oh, wow, this is all about the Jews. They are clearly the chosen people of Yahweh. This is crazy. Well, what do I do? This is all I know. Well, maybe a secret Jew went to England at one point, and then all the bad Jews stayed there, but the good Jew is, and it's ridiculous. It's inauthentic. It's insulting to the actual Jews. It's insulting to you. It's insulting to your ancestors. It offends the Aesir and Yahweh. It is wrong all around. We stand in solidarity in saying that's nonsense. Don't do that. But yes, Fawn, I'm going to take a break for a second while you begin to answer. Question for you both. What are some of your tips about how to be consistent in life and responsibilities, etc.?
That is a great question, but let me give a little preface is that I have a tendency to live in a very acting when acting is correct, but letting go when I don't have control or what have you. Sometimes this does bite me in the butt. I can get overwhelmed by things because things build up. But as I was speaking before with Alzheimer's, I do place a heavy emphasis on the fate and the nature and how things are rolling out and contemplating how the gods might see things or what have you. But that doesn't mean I'm inactive or I don't have or take action. Instead, I find myself, the downside is reacting to a lot that which flows to me. But because I have that in my head already, that I am just kind of following the flow of things, I know that I'm going to have to react. And sometimes I wonder if the people that are very willful and very planned if they themselves are ever caught off guard with things kind of falling out underneath them, and then they emotionally react to things they can't control. So that's kind of where that dichotomy comes in. But I found too for myself, there is a certain sense of stability that comes in even when there's not an attempt to achieve it. That finding yourself correctly going with a time schedule. So, and Asatru, I mean, he's not here, so but I know he would scathe at me for what I'm about to say. But for me, I've, following the Iron Mark versus following the Gregorian calendar. So it's like there's 5 weeks in this month, and I'm like yelling about calendars like some sort of like nut. But at the same time, I'm following this other pattern. And it's the same, like, looking at the year, sometimes I'll only look at the year based on the holy tides, what's coming up, what thresholds are we passing through. And so I find a pattern, I find this recognition. So to honestly say, from my perspective, is to align yourself correctly. And I'm not saying this with the intention of like political jargon or religious jargon or over religiousized jargon. I'm not, the only way you can get right with the gods is if you attend every half ceremony, and then you will find the light, brother. No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that it helped me greatly when I aligned myself to the holy tides, and I began to see the year and its evolution and its cyclical nature. And it greatly helped me not just feel like I was lost in the maelstrom, but that I was flowing down a river and I was seeing these guideposts, and I could kind of pull myself towards willful inclinations, or when I saw a correct moment to strike, I would loose the arrow, and it was good. And what I found is a lot of times that led me into very synchronistic places, and meeting people and talking to people and finding myself showing up at just the right time or missing out on stuff that I really didn't need to be in, or vice versa. And so I have, I think, a different view on that, because I would be lying to you if I was to say that I was this just timely and absolutely stabled person in what I'm doing day to day. And anybody, especially all the leadership in the Asatru Folk Assembly, know I am not that person. I am ethereal at best in a lot of ways. But that's because I find myself flowing around. But I can say this much. One of the things that's helped me the most is aligning myself to the holy tides of the year and my community. It grounds me. It brings me back in. It helps me feel that spiritual connectivity that I need. And it keeps me from getting lost in all of it. And the other, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I do get hyper focused on what's in front of me. Now, bad part is peripheral vision gets lost, and sometimes I lose count or track of things going on. But I have found over the years that if I can hyper focus on what's in front of me, and oftentimes interactions with the fellow folk community, even though I may fail in other places, the consistency of being there and forward facing when I'm with someone or a group of people has created it's not even created. It just is a sense of sincerity that I feel does go a long way. And I find this too in my work. there's the paradox of the client who's waiting is on a time schedule, but the moment he gets in the chair, he never wants to leave. He will talk to me for forever. So it's always the idea that when people are kind of caught in the maelstrom of meeting deadlines and schedules and so on and so forth, does truly go away with the sincerity of true interaction. So I depend on that a lot, and almost to a detriment. So I would warn not to do it too much, but don't be afraid to focus on the moment. Don't be afraid to kind of accept that which is coming around you, and anything that makes a routine, view it as a blessing. If that means day to day, there's something that you need to do. You need to get up and help a family member because they're elderly or children, or there's something that you do. In our family, we do these night walks, and they have become part. I didn't resist. They became a part of my routine. And what I end up finding is that it helps me not get lost in all of it. So finding your pattern, finding your tempo is really, really important. If you find yourself as more like me, where you're kind of floating around, and, that's what I think will help alleviate and help you if you're having this struggle of time management. If you're having this struggle, you can find the pattern of things that ground you. And if they're not helping you, of course, I would say move to something else. But you should try to find that which naturally occurs. I think that will help you. Like a perfect example too is for me, the staying up late for the podcast has affected my life. Not in a bad way, it's just in a way. And one of the things I was thinking about doing was taking a secondary night job, because I find myself staying up. And I already kind of did that before the podcast, but the podcast was even a product of my staying up here on the East Coast while, folks are awake on the West Coast. And so you want to formulate and arm yourself by perceiving what you are doing and then utilizing those moments naturally. Don't force it. If this is the time that you do things, then you should hold that as a mark of stability, and then move on from there. Oh, we got a doggo. See, I just like a squirrel. Squirrel. No, the overarching thing is finding the tempo, finding the rhythm that helps you gain. And for me, it's like the macro is the year and the holy tides, almost to the point now where I'm not even in the whole months and days. It's like midsummer, okay, Sigurd, and then next is Freyfaxi, and it's, but some people can't do that because of their work or the way that they have deadlines and so on and so forth. So try to find things that ground you, and then really focus on what you're doing in front of you. But not to your own detriment, because sometimes over-focusing on what's in front of you makes you forget about all the other stuff that needs to.
Speaking out about one's detriment, I hear things. And it came to me while I was off tending to the needs of my family and my bladder, that somebody was lamenting the Gregorian calendar. I am not Gregory, but it has been the calendar that we've used for 400 years. So I don't think these Christians and their Gregorian calendar is a reasonable excuse to miss prearranged deadlines and dates on things. this man on the screen with me is the only person that like I would take that from unironically. Like, no, he seriously is lamenting the Gregorian calendar as to why he was not at the Witan meeting tonight.
There's a 5th week in the month. What is that?
Anyways, no, thank you for covering on that. I had to help Mandy with a couple things and tuck my daughter in and do a little bit there. So what I was going to say, there are lots of right ways to do it. Habit is key. Get in good, healthy habits and force yourself to do those things over and over and over and over again until it's muscle memory. Routine and habit are really important. And if you space responsibilities and you space consistent things in your life, it is very hard. Once you build the muscle memory to where it is something you naturally do and it's an ingrained habit, it is so much easier to maintain that because you feel it's lost when it doesn't happen. This pertains to reading stuff or studying or working out or dieting or anything you want to do in your life to make yourself better. Habit is everything. Build good habits and go through a solid period of time making sure you do stuff. I would also say lists are really valuable if you can make sure the list is in your face. If you have a list that's hidden in a place on your phone you are not normally looking, then you will not see it and you might as well not have a list. So having a list to where it is set up somewhere where you will see it, that's important. Out of sight, out of mind is a thing with me. Now, I say this because I have a big problem sorting information. I get lots of stuff that I'm supposed to remember. Lots of things pile at once and overlap, and it's hard to keep everything sorted. So these are things I've had to learn doing myself, and I still, need a lot of improvement at them, but these are the things that have helped me on it. But yeah, and I'm glad that you realize that's something you want to get better at, because getting overstimulated with too much information is a very, very easy and understandable problem to find yourself in today.
He said both of you, but I'm going to answer two. ADHD and caffeine. I swear it's a superpower. Just develop it.
How can you develop something not everybody? Well, the caffeine part I get sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's focus, but then there's trouble focusing, but there's also a hyper focus that comes with overcorrection to where you obsess about certain things. So there's some stuff in there to think about on both ends.
Well, I did want to say to add, because this seems to add to it, as Finwraith said, should we stop using Arabic numbers and go back to Roman numerals? And again, this is where I relent. I understand the wisdom that Asatru is saying when he says, this is our calendar. We've been using it for so long. We're not alien in our society. And the reason why our society picked up Arabic numerals instead of the Roman numerals is because one was built to be written on stone and the other was built to be written on paper. And we write on paper now. So it's just easier and more convenient for everyone to kind of just go in that direction. And I'm not trying to be alien, and I don't encourage our folk to be alien for this, especially for just to be the sake to be alien. I want to stick out, so I'm going to be different. Like that kind of garbage is not good. And I don't agree with it. But yeah, that's kind of like where I truly do relent. And it's on me. That's my fault for some of that. But the idea again is that we don't want to be so different that our own folk see us as being they can't bridge. They can't come across that. In actuality, coming home to this faith should feel so natural. That's why we have to, I think, avoid making proclamations of like, I'm only going to use the lunar calendar or the Anglo-Saxons in this time of the year.
Okay, so I ran into this tonight talking with Alan about something, scheduling it. It also depends on who you're talking to. So Alan's like, Matt, can you be available at 3:00 on Saturday? Well, no, I can't. That's precisely when I'm doing something. I can't do it. Later in the conversation, it gets going, this and that, blah, blah, blah. And he brings up something about Eastern time. And I'm like, hold on, Alan. When you asked me if I could do something at 3:00, were you talking about your 3:00 or my 3:00? Oh, I meant Eastern, of course. Well, not of course, Alan. I don't live in Eastern time zone. I live in Pacific time zone.
That is
yes, at noon, there's a lot. I absolutely can do that at noon. So it all depends.
Tell them in their time. Ask in their time.
Yes, as a general rule, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to somebody that you know is a nerd about, like, if it's a small number, we all get it if you want to use Roman numerals. And if it's a big number and you know somebody nerds out about that, then cool, talk to them in Roman numerals. But if you're talking to regular people, most people you're going to encounter are going to be familiar with the Arabic numbering. Just like, if your friend is in on the game that you're playing with your lunar calendar thing that you want to do, then cool, do that. But when you're communicating cross platform to people that are not on that page, and this goes with any communication, you need to be intentional by all the stuff you do. So if your intention with your communication is to get the person on the receiving end to know what you're talking about, then you need to tailor it to that. If it's to express something in a correct way or in a pious way, then maybe you'll do it different. If your point of communication is to like mystify them with your arcane knowledge, then again, you communicate differently. It just depends on what the purpose is. And the hand gestures help. So, last question of the night. How important is national identity to the AFA? Svan?
I just think that national identity is part and parcel with things that we would consider seemly or honorable. There is an inner and an outer, and there is a place that you belong. There is a people you belong to. I think our faith lends very clearly to the idea of connectivity between the multiplicity. That's why we believe in multiple gods. Well, that's why there are multiple gods, is because all forces do not boil down to singularity. That doesn't work. Multiplicity is the truth of all forces, all nature, all meta nature, beyond nature, and everything. It is so when we speak about the multiple identities that a person may carry, one of them naturally is national identity. But it gets very, very interesting too when you can't shirk that identity, whether you want to or not. That's also a very interesting thing. Culture, ethnicity, race, these things define you whether you want them to or not. And I think that's a very big overarching topic for our people, for other people. How can you say that you're Asatru, you're not even from Scandinavia, or you're not even from Sweden, or you're not even from, and so now they start to get the designation, especially when they want to weaponize it against people. But, you go overseas and people see you and they immediately know you're American, or they immediately know you're a Dane or a Swede or what have you. There's levels of identity that build us as to who we are, because again, everything works in multiplicity. Nothing works in singularity. You are not one brain cell. You are not one physical cell. That's just ridiculous. the entirety of the multiplicity creates the whole of who you are. And one of them is nationality. Now, nations in conventional senses may change. Governments are not nations. There might be people who are not happy with the way their government is going, but they are proud of the culture and the lineage of their people, their nation. And it all boils down to natal. Being of a nation is to be being born of. It's natalism of the land. And we see people trying to rob other people of that. And we don't agree with that. We don't agree with, here's a perfect example. I'm starting to see now on the internet, the wide and wild west internet, there are African descent or Black Americans who are trying to say they were the original Native Americans of North America, South America, and that the Native Americans that as we know them today were interlopers or some sort. To me, I don't agree with that. I think that's that is not a good thing to do. Just as much as you can see them, there was a Swedish documentary where the original Swedes, and they all looked Ethiopian. They were like Ethiopian people living in Sweden and hunting and stuff. I think that is an egregious move to separate people from the land that has shaped them. And I see it elsewhere with people who aren't even my people. So yeah, I really think that there is a component or a layer of nationality that is important simply because we take so much pride and conviction in understanding the building blocks that make us as people, and our faith celebrates it. Our faith does not say that you are not a member, that you're doesn't matter what nation you are, it doesn't matter what king you follow. We don't have this universal, we don't have this one overarching government above governments, king above kings, religion above culture. And that is, again, the Middle East has produced a lot of that thought. And even though they say that, they lie, because you go to Korea and you find Korean Jesus. You go to Jordan.
And he is swole.
He is swole. I like to bring it up because it's just so funny, but you go to Japan, you find Japanese Jesus. And you go to Mississippi and you go into a Black American's house, you're going to find Black Jesus.
All right. So
yeah,
on a side, when I first got into Asatru, there was a skinhead friend of mine that knew this other skinhead dude that his whole hobby, unironically, was collecting like velvet paintings of Black Jesus.
Okay.
And the prize ones to get were, as was described to me, the Black Jesus with the Al Sharpton hair. Like the flowy, like
the relaxed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John knows about relaxing the ethnic hairs. Says he doesn't, but I'm trying to get him to branch out.
He wants me to open up my repertoire.
I want him to learn how to do the Jerry curl with the activator.
Soul glow.
Keeping it juicy. Realistically, national identity does not matter to the Asatru Folk Assembly, and I say that in a neutral way, not in a pejorative, but we've got AFA members in, I think at present, 13 different nations. Nationalism is awesome in its best iteration. Pride in yourself and your people and where you come from. And we need to be honest about what we mean when we say that. Nation used to mean people with the same origin, the same, people from the same belly button, from the same extended family of the same race and the same people. It doesn't mean that anymore. I wish it did. And it does someplace. But for a lot of people in the West, it doesn't mean that anymore. A lot of the time, we just kind of all live in a country, and we find ourselves where we are, and the system we're in may very well not. See, that's a definition and not an etymology, and it changes over time. It talks about common descent, but before it was exclusive to that. So what I was going to say is, yes, the concept of that, and in different times in different places, you can celebrate that more or less. If you are a person who finds yourself in a country that represents you and your people and your heritage and where you're from and the things you hold dear, I think that's a really cool thing and a really special thing and something to be celebrated. But again, we have members from a lot of different places. Our allegiance to the Aesir is what's paramount in the Asatru Folk Assembly. I say that we recognize people who are very proud of, proudly nationalistic for the country they live in, and for people that aren't. What's binding us together as the Asatru Folk Assembly is our shared allegiance to the Aesir.
We also spoke about that a couple of shows back about the folk and how the folk have moved and migrated over vast expanses of the world, seeking that horizon. I think that's a beautiful thing about our people. And I see, in the comments, Antonio Pietrobone, I'm from Argentina, and I'm white and I'm proud of my ancestors. There are folk everywhere, and that's one thing I would say we have to get out of is if there's a folk person from a place that we conceive as not having folk in it, that doesn't disqualify them. I met a young man who is half Pakistani, but he has pale skin, freckles, and red hair, and it's because of where his mother's ancestors come from, and they're in the northwestern part of the mountainous regions there. And I would never know that by the stereotypical. So it's like I think we need to get away from if they're not Germanic. And I mean, we can clearly see that with certain cases. Like if you look at the Russians or the Ukrainians, decades ago, people would say, oh, those are Hunnish, Asiatic invaders. But now you clearly see a lot of them are folk. It's the same with the Finns. It's the same with South America. It's the avoidance of purity spiraling, especially when the blood and the physicality don't lie. If they look like us, when we see them, we identify with them, they identify with us. But they're Argentinian. That's dumb. Don't think that way.
No, what's important for the Asatru Folk Assembly is our folk are our nation. And that's what we celebrate. That's what we unite behind. That's what we rally behind. And that's what is very important to our future and to the future we're trying to build. We live in a different time, and I think the answers to the questions and the outlook is really different depending on when and where you live. But that's the kind of honest assessment of where we're at. But I appreciate you guys so much for joining us tonight. I appreciate all of your questions as usual. And I appreciate you joining us, Svan, and reading the lore and imparting your wisdom to all of us. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Nick, thank you for all that you do. Next week, assuming we can, there's a new baby on his end involved, but the plan is to give you the episode we meant to bring you the second week of last month, where folk builder Chris Savage and I talked to you about the noble Gothic resistance to the encroaching Christianity. So look forward to having that discussion with you guys next week. Till then, hail the Aesir, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember, victory never sleeps.